We believe in you, believe in you. You have shown us your glory, shown us your grace. We believe in you, believe in you. You are mighty now to save.
Hey, girlfriend, how's your cafe au lait?
Oh, it's okay, can we?
I'm being so serious right now. I really want to know how your coffee is. I had a second balloon.
That milk in your coffee was messing with you, wasn't it? Yeah, it happens to more people than you think. Try Lactate. It's real milk without that annoying lactose. Good, right?
Good evening, Connect Group. This evening we're going to begin a fascinating little study of the book of Philippians, focusing on joy, actually focusing on what can rob us of our joy. In each chapter we're going to look at a different challenge that we face in holding on to the joy that God's given to us. And as we look at the first chapter this evening, the obvious thing that jumps out at you when you read chapter 1 are difficult circumstances that can come our way. Now, before we get into the study very far, let me take a second and make a differentiation between happiness and joy. Joy is an attitude. Joy is something that rises above circumstance. For instance, in James chapter 1, verse 2, James will tell us, "Count it all joy when you encounter various trials." So he's talking about having joy in the midst of difficulties. Happiness, on the other hand, is very circumstantial, tied to the situations in which we find ourselves. Happiness is a temporary kind of a thing. You ask her to marry you and she says yes, and you're happy. You apply for a job and you get the job and you're happy. But what if she says no? And what if you don't get the job? You see, happiness is very much tied to the circumstance in which you find yourself. Well, what we're talking about in Philippians and what we're talking about as Christians is Christian joy. And what I want us to see here in chapter 1, as Steve puts the emphasis on circumstance, is that we can't allow circumstances to rob us of our joy. Paul certainly didn't. In chapter 1, we see a couple of reasons why circumstances, difficult circumstances, did not rob Paul of his joy. Paul's in prison, brothers and sisters. He's in prison in Rome. And he's really not sure, as you read in chapter 1, whether he's going to survive or not. He may well be executed. He talks about the fact, I don't know if I'm going to be delivered or not. But in the midst of a very negative situation, Paul finds some positives. And I believe that's a key to not allowing circumstances to rob us of our joy. And that is that we are able to find positives even in negatives. Because you see, we can't control the circumstances that are going to come in our lives. We can't. You can't control if illness is going to come your way or not. You can't control financial difficulties that you may face. You can't control possibility of losing a job. I mean, there's a zillion different things. Fire, storms, all these things come our way, and they're out of our control. But what we can control is our attitude toward those circumstances. And that's what Paul is talking about here, and what he's exhibiting here, I believe, in a beautiful way. Two things that I want you to notice out of chapter 1 to kind of prime us for our discussion this evening. The first is in verses 12 and 13, where the Apostle Paul says, yeah, I'm in prison, but you know what? I've had an opportunity in prison to share the gospel with the whole imperial guard. They've all got to hear the message of Christ. Now, the imperial guard are some of the most important and influential soldiers in all the Roman Empire. These are the men that are responsible for protecting the Caesar and guarding his life. Paul never would have had an opportunity to share the gospel with these men had he not been placed in prison. And so he says, here, yeah, I'm in prison, but look at this opportunity that's been presented to me to share the gospel with these very important people. And then he goes on to say, and on top of that, because of my example and the opportunity that I've had to do this, I've seen brethren take courage, and they're more willing to speak the gospel to other people than they had been before. And so here, in the midst of a very negative situation, Paul says, hey, I can see a couple of positives. It's kind of like the story, I don't know if you've heard it or not, of the two shoe salesmen who go to Africa. And one of the shoe salesmen sends back an email, and he says, call me home. There's no market here. Nobody wears shoes. The other salesman sends an email back, and he says, hey, send me every shoe you've got. The market's wide open. Nobody wears shoes. Same circumstances, but totally different perspectives. That's what Paul's showing to us. And brethren, that's what we need to hold on to, is that even in negative situations, we can find positives. And then something that's really, really important. As Paul goes on in chapter 1, he says this, you know, I don't know if I'm going to be delivered or not. I don't know if I'm going to live or if I'm going to die. But he says in verse 21, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. And he goes on to explain, if I hang around, if I continue to live, I'm going to be able to continue to share the gospel, to do my work, and I'm going to be able to bless you. If I die, well, for me, to die is gain, okay? It's okay. I'm not afraid to die at all. I'm ready to go home and be with the Lord. And so either way it goes for me, I win. It's going to be all right. That perspective, brothers and sisters, is critical. Because that perspective rises above circumstance. That perspective says, hey, I'm a child of God. God's in control. He loves me. He has saved me. He cares for me. He's prepared a place for me. No matter what happens, it's going to be okay. Even when it comes down to matters of life and of death, it's going to be okay. Because it's absolutely true for all of us. For us to live is Christ, and for us to die is gain. The world doesn't have that perspective. If you die, you lose. That's the way the world sees it. That's not the perspective that we have. And here, I think, is a key to our joy. The fact that we know whose we are and who we are, and we know what awaits us. And so no matter what comes, no matter what circumstance we find, we're blessed with true joy. God bless you, and have a wonderful discussion this evening. Thank you.
You are mighty now to save.